Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show brought to you by HoloCrunch. Crunchy.
Yummy goodness.
Today we'll be talking about the 16 days of activism. Gender-based violence came to an end on December 10th. This international campaign to challenge violence against women and girls runs every year from November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, to the Human Rights Day, December 10th. It was initiated in 1991 by the first Women's Global Leadership Institute, held by the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rogers University. The theme this year was Orange the World: Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect. On today's program, discussing this with us, we have
Bukky Williams, Executive Director, Education at Vaccine. Welcome back to the Weekend Show,
Thank
Bukky.
you for having me again. It's been a while.
It's always a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you think some of the achievements we have been able to amass is, especially in this year 2020? 2020 has been a very unique year. It's been, to say the least, it's been a very interesting year. Yeah. So how would you juxtapose some of the achievements and awareness we've been able to establish this year in comparison to previous years?
Yeah, you know what? I think for all of us, even those of us who work in the gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights, SGBV space, it was a wake-up call. And it was a terrifying wake-up call, right? Because I think in March, before, the lockdown in Nigeria, we had been reading news from across the world that domestic violence was increasing. And so by the time, Nigeria locked down, we realized that the same thing was happening here. And we were getting heightened reports of cases from service providers. A lot of them couldn't actually provide services at the beginning because, SGBV services was not considered essential at the beginning of the lockdown. And it just, it was a terrifying wake-up call because we realized that a lot of the work that we had been doing to say that sexual and gender-based violence needs to be a priority, we realized that people hadn't taken it seriously, that there were still a lot of people who actually didn't believe it. Because I remember when we started having this conversation and some of us were like making phone calls, people were like, well, where's the data? How many cases are we actually talking about? And then we were like, we don't have centralized data on these issues, but we know that it's happening based on the reports that it's happening. And a place like Lagos that had a stronger system, their cases shot up. First it was 30%, then it went to 50%, then it was like 60%. And then by the time UN Women was able to collect any data, they said just in the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, they got reports that increased by 56%. It feels like such a long time ago, but that happened just this year. And then by the time we got to June with the case of Uwa in Edo State, who was killed in a church. And then that same week, we heard the news of Barakat in Oyo State, who was also being killed. There was another young woman. There was a case of the 12-year-old girl in Jigawa State. All of these.
And these are the cases we heard of.
Exactly. And then at that time, I believe like a group of us from Stand to End Rape, Tech Her, Youth Hub Africa, Yaga, all came together and just started in Victus Africa, just came together and be like, I remember the call that I had with Chamachiko of Tech Her, where we were just like, this can't continue. Like something's got to give. And so we were like, we're just going to push. There has to be a state of emergency, that's going to be declared. We were not the first to do it, but like, let's just use that to gain momentum that it cannot be business as usual. We need services, we need laws, we need survivor-centered approaches. And thanks to organizations who were willing to stay open in spite of COVID and really push through. Thanks to donors who were willing to support and keep, mobilizing funds to be able to do it. But I think realizing that even this, the House of Reps putting out resolutions, governors saying, we need to declare a state of emergency, governors' wives rallying. And I think for us, the opportunity that came out of COVID is that nobody now can say that gender-based violence is not real. Everyone realized that, like domestic violence is real, sexual violence. We saw increased cases in rape. You were seeing videos online, people just calling for help. So unfortunately, I wish it didn't take a global pandemic
to expose that.
But that's what this year did for us.
You know, Bukky, for a while now, this conversation has been going on. Like, when I saw the topic this week, I was like, by all means, and we've been talking about this for 2 years. At least every quarter we have this conversation, the OWA situation. And so I was reading and I found that 1 in 3 women have experienced, not will experience, have experienced physical or sexual violence. And in most cases it's from people they know or they are intimate with. Partners, and so this year the theme also speaks on funding, because a lot of funding has now been diverted from this cause towards the pandemic. And so while all this work is being done, are there increased efforts, especially in Nigeria, to fund the campaign against gender-based violence? Because you need to put your money where your mouth is. So what's that situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really great question. And just to add to the figures you're giving, because I think it's also important to remember that it's not even, because those figures are even of, you know, women 15, young women 15, and then to
18,
older women like to 49. But before the age of 18, at least 1 in 4 girls is going to experience sexual violence. So just to know that, it doesn't start at 15, it just continues throughout your life. But in terms of the important question, we have seen increased donor funding in sexual and gender-based violence. We have. So we see Ford Foundation is now funding, Open Society for West Africa has been funding, they support us as well. You've seen the Spotlight Project from the United Nations. So they are funding across at least like 7 states to be able to support issues around gender-based violence and addressing it. And you're also seeing MacArthur. So big donors are realizing that this work, if they're supporting governance, even if you're supporting climate change, whatever issues you're supporting, if you're not addressing gender issues, and if you're not in any way contributing to the fight against gender-based violence, your work is not going to move forward. Right? So there's that realization now about integrating it into the work that we're doing. So you're seeing a little bit of increased funding, but it's not enough. Globally, if you look at the funding landscape for just gender issues and gender-based violence, it's about 5 to 10% of general funding that just goes to these issues. Now, the bigger issues, what are our governments doing? Are they funding this? And the truth is, you have to go state by state, right? Because the national government is going to tell you, yes, they're funding, but because of COVID, a lot of resources, like you said, is being directed to that. So I can't give them a pat on the back on that. I've seen their increased interest, but in the funding part, we need more. For the governors, you can see a governor like Fayemi Ekiti State, and of course you can't say that. You know, he has a wife who's also really passionate about this and who's led the fight on it. And so he's been funding. They've actually created a response fund. Which is pretty amazing, and we need that in every state across Nigeria. You know, they opened a sexual assault referral center. They've opened a sexual offenders register. So they're putting systems in place that's going to outlast them to continue to support this cause and to make sure that survivors are able to get access to services for free. You see Lagos State actually also show some movement. I've heard the government also funds some of the services as well.
And even helping with prosecution.
Exactly. And I know over the pandemic, they also donated some things like food to shelters and things like that. So you've seen some movement, but across the board, I'm not gonna give them any great scores yet. We still, that fund part is still really important. We're getting a lot of, you know, interest, but the money is not on the same level yet.
But with the funds from international donor agencies, the increase in awareness across board globally, not just in Nigeria, but globally, about sexual and gender-based violence, what has the impact been on ground? So how are the victims feeling this? Do they feel the situation is getting better? Do they feel they have more options? Do they feel more empowered to leave and to report a situation like that? From your experience, is the impact being felt at the grassroots? I mean,
like, I always find it difficult to speak for victims and survivors, but I will be honest and say, just from what I see, I'm demoralized sometimes. You get these cases and you're heartbroken because you can't just pick up the phone and tell somebody to like go to your nearest police station, because you know that you can't guarantee that if they go to the nearest police station, they're not going to be re-stigmatized and re-traumatized by somebody asking them to really tell the nitty-gritty of what happened to them and asking them inappropriate questions. You can't refer them to the nearest hospital because you don't know if that doctor or nurse is trained to be able to handle them with the level of care that they need and provide them with the services and ensure that they feel supported and believed. So for the average victim and survivor, you have to put them through processes that makes it difficult for them to be able to feel like society believes them. Right? They feel the burden of proof is always on them, no matter what services they access. So really, the people who stand in the gap are the service providers like Dorothy and Jamanzi Foundation, Stand to End Rape, Project Alert, Mirabel Center. They now have another center supported by Spotlight in Sokoto State. You know, those are the organizations and groups who stand in the gap that if you refer people to them when they pick up the phone, you know that they'll be taken care of because they will hold their hand through all of these processes. But the only way we're going to get to what you're asking for is if somebody who has been raped or if a woman who's been beaten can walk into the nearest facility and get the help that they need without somebody having to hold their hand through that processes or without governors reconciling.
We will speak
No
about
abusers.
that's a whole point
So
which we must
talk
talk
about, right?
about.
But you know what I mean? Until that happens, until somebody comes on social media and tells their story and more people are willing to be like, this is where you can get help, rather than being like, ooh, there's violence on the timeline. I'm here. What's going on? Gist us. You know, still making it a sensational issue. I think until we start to see that, and we're seeing that more and more, let me not lie. We're seeing better responses online compared to 3 years ago. If somebody came to report like the Shaiton case, you would have seen that people would have completely destroyed her. But what you saw as well, apart from the fact that people didn't believe her, was also an outpouring of like, actually, she has a right to share her story. And we have a right to understand what is going on and provide that level of support as well. But until we start to see more of that and not even seeing different forms of violence crop up, we have a long way to go.
We have joining us on Skype Dikeledi Moabelo from South Africa. She is an activist and philanthropist. So she will be joining us shortly while we continue the conversation. However, the culture oppressing victims of sexual and gender-based violence is so bad that if people are fighting next door, a husband and wife, someone within your own house will tell you it's family matters, stay out of it.
Very much.
If the victim goes to the police station to report it, the police will say it's a family issue, stay out of it. It has now gotten to a point where a state governor, the governor of Benue State, my state, and so this is troubling, was seen in the past couple of days reconciling a man who had physically abused his wife. No prosecution. The story, and the worst part is that it's being publicized like some victory.
Yes.
What can we say about people in authority enabling sexual and gender-based violence with actions such as this?
I mean, it's frustrating.
We must speak about this because
we
it's
have to.
unfortunate.
We have to. It is frustrating.
But as an addendum, even before you answer this question, as an addendum to what Andy had said, do you think that the governor, and we're speaking about Governor Autumn here, do you think he meant well? Like, he wanted to bring the perpetrator, I know you're looking at me like that's crazy. He wanted to bring the perpetrator, which was the husband, and the victim, which was the wife, to sit down and say, okay, how do we solve this? How do we sort of, not as an enabler, because he's seen what's happening, he's seen the statistics, he knows it's within the 16 days of activism. So he's bringing in and saying, okay, in this cultural context that Andy has spoken of, how can we resolve this issue? Do you think he had a slight inclination to, do things properly, but it just came off, obviously it was unacceptable, but it just came off the wrong way? Okay,
so I'll be generous, because, they always mean well. Because they believe marriage is for life. Both looking at it from a cultural perspective, but depending on which culture, because Yoruba culture, hey. Sometimes when you gotta go, you gotta go. You understand, right? So, from the cultural perspective and from the religious perspective, no matter what religion you look at, marriage is supposed to be for life, right? It's supposed to find ways to ensure reconciliation and coming back together. So I would see that. But here's the thing, is that there's a lot of work that has gone into explaining violence and abuse and how marriages and how society reinforces that in many ways and leaves women in danger and often loss of their lives, right? Because you saw the video and you saw the side of her face and it was red. For a black person to look that red.
And a nursing mom.
Who just had a C-section.
And she said he kept on like sitting on her stomach when she was pregnant. Yeah.
And this woman is a doctor. Remember all of these things, and this woman is a doctor. So all of these things was happening. So you have to even think of the context in which she felt that she had no other help except to make a video, while her son was, walking around. And I don't know if people noticed that he kept saying, "Sorry, mommy."
Yeah.
Sorry, he's a baby, and that dynamic is what he's growing up in and living in. So there's so many, cues that the governor should have taken. And then to just also add that the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act was just passed in Benue last year after the death of Ochenya led to that outcry, right? But there'd been a lot of work that had been happening behind the scenes to even get it happening until the death of Ochenya roused it again. But do you remember that one of the reasons why it did not go through the first time was because some legislators were saying, are you telling us we don't have the right to correct our wives? Physical violence is a big problem in Benue State.
It is. And I'll say this, I grew up there, and it's true.
It's one of the states that has the highest rates of physical violence against women and girls. So the message that the governor was sending was really important. And I'm mentioning all this thing because it was really important, because it's signaling. And signaling is very important behavior on changing norms about what is right and what is wrong. And so the governor should have taken his cue from the law that he signed that said, domestic violence is violence against the state. It is no longer just violence against that woman. Once she has reported and said, this man has done this to me, not once, not twice. And this is in the ways he's carried out violence against me. Even if the governor wanted to reconcile, the burden should have been on that man. For him to seek restitution, for him to put in place, right? There's things you can do according to the law. Even if he doesn't want to, he would sign an undertaking. He would actually be taken in to understand that he committed a crime.
And even be evaluated.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's processes within the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law that could have been taken. But to go around the law,
completely unacceptable.
To go around the law and then say, like, come to me. You're not a monarch. You're not a community leader. You are the holder of the law in the state. And you didn't go through the law. You just went there and then you televised it.
Yeah.
I
don't understand why that was a publicity-bound event. Because
it shouldn't have been.
And we see this every day on social media. And it's the same way families will say, when a man beats the wife and the wife leaves the family, it's her family that will bring her back. And so I feel the Sarasota generation, the generation that comes out to talk, has helped a lot of people in unlearning, because there's now the shame factor, which, whether we like it or not, plays a major role. And so by bringing back things like this, what it says is that it's normalizing violence against, and I say against women. So what I feel about this is that when we have these conversations, the numbers are stacked up against women. So it's not everybody experiences. So let's focus on women. And so how, and this is me asking myself too, how can we, what do we have to do to the men? How can we teach men that this just doesn't work? Because I've not seen a man slapping somebody who is bigger than him, or a policeman with a gun for no reason, because they know there are repercussions there and then. But it's constantly being perpetrated against the women. Now, that son who we saw in that video telling the mom sorry, he has grown up to watch that. And so he has two options. One, to become violent, or two, to fight against violence against women.
Like his mom,
If the state isn't teaching people against this or prosecuting people, what can we do about the men? Because a lot of this advocacy is still targeted at women. And so it's reactionary. What can we do to
Yeah.
I don't even feel we need to educate men about this. So it's hard to frame this question. What can we do to reduce this on the part of men? And I'm willing to learn so that I could teach more
And
people.
the reason why we're hampering on Benue, and
Yeah.
I'm playing, my previous question was a bit of like a devil's advocate question, because we want to get to solutions, right?
Yes.
And it reminds me of the case when I was in school in America, and my white friends would ask me, how can I be a better ally? It feels like everything I'm doing is, I'm castigated for everything I do. So if I say something, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So playing devil's advocate in this situation, I'm not holding brief
No,
with the
I
governor.
hear you.
I don't know him.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, if he had the right intention, culturally,
Yeah.
to keep the family together, but obviously it's come out, it's wrong, he now knows, okay, I shouldn't have done that. But how do we also not deter other people who want to be allies to the fight against sexual and gender-based violence from saying, it's better not to do anything, or before they come and, you know, attack me for just the little that I've done or I've said. So how do we encourage them to do more, but do more effectively
In the right way.
and in the right way and in the right context?
Yeah, you know what? The biggest thing I realize in doing this work a lot is that often people think it's about, you know, individuals, not about systems. And that's really the biggest barrier to people understanding the issue. Because I think people need to understand that when we're talking about patriarchy, when we're talking about gender equality, when we're talking about power imbalances, we're talking about a system. And you are just one part of that system. So if you don't understand it that way, you're going to think about when we're talking about domestic violence, you're immediately saying, me as a man, I beat women. And it's like, dude, I'm not talking about you. You know, the problem is bigger than you, because there's even women who believe that, you know, if a man doesn't beat them or, you know, castigate them, then that's not love. Because we've all been raised into this system to believe this is how relationships should be. This is, you know, men should be leaders, women should be behind them, supporting them. You know, it spreads through all spheres of life. And violence is a symptom of that. So violence is not, you know, the main root cause of it. The root cause is that we believe in our society that men are here and women are here. And that anytime there is this shift, you can use violence to bring it back into order. That's what happens, you know? And so it plays out from homes, to schools, to religious places, to government. It plays out in all of those spheres. And I think it's really about getting men to understand that. I think that's really the biggest issue, is getting them to understand that. Because I think often when we're talking about gender-based violence, they feel like, oh, you're just talking about men as perpetrators. No, we're talking about a system that rewards you for violence. Do you understand? And how do you unlearn that? And helping them to understand that there's a process for unlearning it. And that maybe we can catch some of them young, but you're already an adult. So what processes can we put in place for you to unlearn that behavior? And that's where I say that we need more men to be able to have those conversations with men. Because when I have those conversations with men, they're a little bit on the defensive, right? Because here comes a woman telling us that we're bad, we're evil, how dare they, da-da-da. But actually, if you have another man talking to another man to say like, guy, I understand where you're coming from, but here are the reasons why, you know? Somebody said to me, like, you know, men might hear women, but they listen to other men.
True.
You know? So that's why we need more men speaking about this to more men, not coming to tell us women like, woman, leave now. Leave. Why don't you just leave? You just kill you there. Da, da, da. No, but if you are talking to other men and helping to engage them, helping to unlearn these behaviors and learning that, you know, you being kind, you showing care, you not using violence as language, you know, does not make you weak, you know, and actually makes you who you want to be. And that you have a right as a man to, you know, experience the fullness of all of the emotions available to you, not just the ones that make you feel manly. In the sense of the word. And I think that's really critical to be able to have that conversation. And to be honest, it's long-term work, but we have to start from somewhere and keep going. And I think there's also the sense that it's for all of us, even for me, is not to always center yourself in the conversation. I remember, I haven't really been on Twitter for a while, but like a conversation came to my to my notice that, you know, a young girl had entered a man's DM to say that, you know, can she mentor him or something? And in the end, she's like, but if you're sexist or misogynistic, please don't respond. And he said he was, you know, hurt by that. And I understand, because you don't want somebody to come to you as an individual and be like, oh, don't be sexist or misogynistic. But then you also live in a society where sexual harassment is norm. Right? We've been doing a lot of work with university students, and every student that I have met, every female student I have met, has a story related to sexual harassment in the institution. And the way they tell the stories is like, you know, it's normal. Like, that's what happens in any institution. And so when we live in a society that just makes it normal for you to experience violence, people grabbing you, people telling you to call them, people telling you I like you in inappropriate situations, you start to wonder that, you know, what barriers are women putting in place to be able to exist in the world? And if you as a man don't have to put up those barriers, maybe it might be time for you to see what role you can play in helping to dismantle those barriers so women can be just as free, you know, as you. And I think that's really it. It's for men to find, even when you're gisting with your friends, you know, when your guy friend is like, see that thing, do you know what I mean? Those kind of things, just, you know, being like, no, we don't do that here. You know, just not creating an environment of zero tolerance for any kind of harassment or abuse of women around you. That's part of that change. Or in your church, when somebody is preaching something that might seem like it's justifying abuse, and you going up to your pastor and be like, Pastor.
No, Pastor.
You know,
or the imam, right? Going up to the imam and being like, that's one. It's not it. Or looking, or, you know, when your child comes back from school and says, my teacher said, and that you can go back to that school and be like, that's not what we teach children.
So I have an interesting story. I've been to a church once where, and this was when there was a case against a pastor. And so a pastor came and was like, oh, the church is under attack, and so people shouldn't be involved in such conversations. And so I asked to see him, and we had a conversation. I was like, by doing this, let's forget what you've said. Do you understand that you have victims in your church who, by virtue of what you've said, will never be able to come speak to you about this? And so he came back the next week and was like, you know what, I'm sorry I said this, and now I know better. And so this is that part of the conversation of men speaking to men, like you have said. And so I'm sure now, even if he has unlearned something, and so we need to have these conversations some more, even just for the part of the victims, because the more we silence them, more people are being violated and abused, and they can't even speak about it. And I feel the first step is being able to just talk about it in a way where you get some form of justice. And sometimes speaking is justice for some people. They know nothing could be done, but they may be saving another woman from falling in the hands of an abuser. So I do agree with you. As men, we need to be able to speak to ourselves some more, because there's a lot of unlearning actually going on. And that still needs to be done.
Because you've been raised, I mean, all your life. And sometimes, again, I try to put myself, let's try to empathize with not empathize.
I was
with
like, girl.
I try to empathize with people who have this mentality. Like, it's literally ingrained in them.
It is.
You know, they've learned it in the household, they've learned it in the schools, they've learned it within their religious bodies.
It to work.
And taking it to work. So it continues, and it's like the society keeps on, you know, egging them on. This is how it is. This is how to be a man. You know? So the reason I asked about allies, how can allies better educate themselves? How can they be better allies? How can they support? How can they gain the confidence to speak out and Sorosoke in the right way?
I think we have Dikeledi on Zoom. Hello, can you hear us? She's in South Africa, and we all know how bad the case is in South Africa. We see the videos every day. Good morning, can you hear us?
We might be having a bit of trouble with your audio. Are you on mute? If you are, can you kindly unmute the call? Oh, we might have lost her again. Network issues.
So bad.
Network issues.
Network.
So,
But I just want to
Yeah,
quickly
go ahead.
respond to that in terms of like the building the allies. You know what? To be quite honest, like it's not like I don't, feel for men, right? In the sense that especially those who really have, who really genuinely want to help and really want to support. And I think the biggest thing that I realized about building allies and building allyship is the willingness to learn more, and the willingness to put your ego and pride aside. Because that's the things and to remind ourselves that learning is not a one-time process. You're constantly learning through life. Even me, like I didn't get here magically. A lot of women want to say that, I was a feminist since I was 2 years old. Not that I didn't believe that I as a girl deserved every right, and I didn't, rebel against, patriarchy as a 3-year-old by going to play instead of learning how to cook. All of those things, we all do those things. But the truth is, there were still things that it took me a long time to unlearn about the role of men, or, even my role as a woman, or what womanhood means to me, and always defining it in relation to masculinity. I had to unlearn this, and it took me, taking a step back and being like, okay, so what does this mean? What does this mean? Asking questions. And really, more than anything else, this is what I always tell people, is that at the heart of whatever work and activism you do is care for people and care for self. So if you genuinely care about people, you would be willing to put your ego and your pride aside and continue to learn ways in which people want to be cared for, not ways in which you think you should care. And so if your activism, if your advocacy, if your genuineness for humanity is led with that care, for some people, they're able to love, you know what I mean, right? But like if you put care and empathy at the center of your life and at the work that you're doing, you would want to unlearn, because you're thinking that it's not just about me, it's about being in community. It's about that South African phrase, Ubuntu, I am because we are.
I am because we are, yes.
You know, so if that is what is driving you and leading you towards this work, you will get there, because you would always think of that. My life and the work that I do is in relation to others, not just for self.
Yeah, and even when you make a mistake, which we all do, you would literally sit back, analyze, okay, how can I be a better ally tomorrow? You wouldn't go back into your shell and say, okay, I don't want to be attacked. It's mistake is a part of life. You would go back, analyze, and say, okay, how can I better educate myself to be an ally to this
and
cause?
I think people take for granted that people understand genuineness. You understand when somebody is genuinely made a mistake.
Yes.
Right? And you can also see when somebody, is hiding behind, well, I was just trying to help you. Now you're making me feel bad. Right? But when somebody is genuinely trying to learn. And so you definitely come from it like, okay, this mistake,
how can we fix it?
Exactly. And how can we work together? And it's also to be willing to be held accountable. That I made a mistake. Do you understand? Because for some of us, even using the word victim or survivor, right? It's quite important to be like, how does the person want to be referred to? Do you understand what I'm saying? So those things, we have to learn it, or even how to talk to somebody who's going through violence, or even how we help our friends who are in domestic violence situations, right? You can't just walk up to them and be like, you don't want to live, do you want to die here? That doesn't help the person. And I keep always reminding my friends, and it took me on learning that, because before I used to be the thing like, in me, any man, one beating, move. You grow up and you realize it's not that easy. You build a relationship with somebody. And until somebody told me something and said that, most women or most children in this situation is that they love the person.
Yeah.
So they don't want to not be around the person. They just want the abuse to stop. And so everything they do is working towards, how do I make the abuse stop?
How do I change this
Exactly,
person?
because they see this person in the fullness, right? They don't just see the abusive personality. They see the kindness that they show once in a while. They see the struggle that person is going through. And so all they want is for that person to emerge from this cloud that makes them abusive. but the realization is that you can't save anybody.
So I have a final question for you, and I like the perspective which you just brought, because this is an era of cancel culture. What's the redemption for people who have bing guilty of perpetrating violence against gender-based violence? Is there any comeback, or so they've changed, they're sorry, they've like the governor was trying to do, which I understand where you're also coming from. So we've identified this as a problem. She also said there was a note which he wrote saying, "Thank God for delivering me." So he had a history of it, and so he had been working on it. And so when someone has been found guilty of this, and then they come to the public or to the court, and they're ready to change, how can in most cases they're ostracized from the society, especially when they are known people. Is there a balance that can be created to ensure that they don't just say, you know what, since people see me this way, I might as well just go on with it?
Yeah, I'm going to couch my response in one saying that, you know, one of the things I've realized, and that's been heartbreaking for me, is that abusers are never ostracized for a very long time. You know, if we think of known abusers, Bill Cosby still gets a lot of love.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of comedians who've said bad things, who've told rape jokes and things like that, and people still, you know, defend them. You know what I mean? There's even known men who've saying that they're allies. You know, there's some short man who says he's an ally, but who has in many ways put women up for being insulted, for being, you know, assaulted, and made them targets. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, the biggest thing is, one is like, what does the survivor want? The person in which they committed violence against. What justice do they want? You always go with that, because it always has to be what the survivor wants. So if the survivor wants a different form of justice, restorative justice, or all those kind of things, like, yes, let's do that. And if there's actually genuine, you know, momentum to change, and you put in these are the things that are going to show that I am going to change. You lay out a plan that shows you're going to change, and this is how you're going to practice restitution. In doing that, then yes, because then that shows that you've thought about it, you've gone through the processes. But anything else, I don't think it can work. But more than anything else, because we often don't get justice in Nigeria. Right? Our legal systems. A lot
of laws.
Exactly. Lack of implementation. So you could get a case that could go to court and they'd be like, there's not enough evidence. And the person's going to be like, I was accused, but I
was found guilty.
Exactly. I wasn't convicted. So what does that mean? So for me, it's like, let's get justice. That's where we should start from. So if you've been accused of anything, you know, if your name is cleared in the right way, not just because, you know, there wasn't enough evidence, and you've shown that you're willing to change and you're putting in systems of being willing to change. And I think, you know, a good example, okay, so for example, is the cases of religious leaders who have been accused by their parishioners. Which one of them have we seen that have shown remorse for what has been done? There's just not been any remorse at all. Do you know, like, so for me, if you're going to say that you want us not to cancel you, you know, start with showing remorse. Start with putting systems in place to ensure that those you committed crimes against, because it is a crime, you know, it's a crime, that you can get justice. And when justice has been, you know, justice has not been denied or delayed, then you can begin the process to start to redeem yourself. And you do that by asking your community and by asking those you committed crimes against that, what do I need to do to redeem myself?
And that takes you putting your ego aside, as you said, you know, holding yourself accountable and creating systems that will hold you also accountable.
That was
and I think
the
in the largest
part,
of things in Nigeria, that's one thing that we miss. Building a system that, irrespective of if you or somebody else is in power tomorrow, that system checkmates you when you're doing wrong. My final question to you before we let you go. At the Weekend Show, we pride ourselves in being a family-oriented show. So today we have parents watching with their children. We have people across all different age brackets, you know, watching and consuming this information. What's your last word to a parent right now who's watching at home with their 5-year-old kid? What message can they take away from this?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I would tell parents is that really the home unit and the family unit is really one of the most crucial parts of this fight, honestly. Because I think we have to start having these conversations with children from such an early age. Really helping them understand the world around them, really helping them understand that violence is never the answer, helping them understand that, you know, both girls and boys have rights and equal opportunities. It really starts from that. And I think parents, it's a difficult conversation to have, but there's so many resources out there that can help you guide this conversation. But a big part of it is also making your home a safe space for children. Because you might talk to them that violence is bad, but if you are also using violence,
even against them.
Exactly. If you're also using violence, they're not going to believe what you're saying. So it's also you being able to say, in what ways am I teaching my child conflict resolution that does not involve violence? You know, that does not involve violence, and really reminding them of that, and ensuring that as parents as well, we're also pushing the different, you know, spheres of society. You know, the schools, are you making sure that your child in their school, there's a safeguarding policy that protects all children and that has a very clear referral pathway if anything happens to a child by anyone in power or anyone affiliated with the school, you know, to ensure that children are protected? Are we ensuring that the Child Rights Act in our state is being implemented? Are we ensuring there's systems? So it's really looking at the different spaces as parents to be able to say, how do we build a better and safer world for all children, not just mine? Because I think one of the things that we do is that we say, well, my home is safe, but if your neighbor's home is not safe, it has an impact on you as well. So as parents, you know, not to add to the extra burden of you raising those beautiful children, but it really does start with you and really creating that environment within your home, because as we build that at every household, it spreads and we have a better country.
That's a beautiful place to leave it. Bukky Williams, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Always an educative time having you on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break right now. When we return, more on The Weekend Show. Don't go anywhere.